Welcome to Rally 101 on differentials, and in this video we're going to explain to you how the differentials in a Hyundai i20N Rally2 car work, what changes you can make and how they affect the performance. So for me, the differentials are one of the key components to ultimate car performance and how we get the power from the engine through the gearbox and actually onto the ground. So with the Rally2 car, we obviously run a four-wheel drive system. So we have a differential at the front, which is here on the back of the gearbox, all part of the same housing. And then of course we have a separate differential unit mounted at the back of the car. You can see here from the housings, we then have drive shafts that then go out to each upright and wheel to then drive the actual tyre onto the ground. Each of these housings are a slightly different length, and this is because it allows us to have the same size drive shaft on both left and right. And again, visible here on the gearbox, we have a long extension here with an input shaft inside, but this allows us to have the same length drive shaft on this side versus the opposite side. So the differential system that most cars run is a limited slip differential. Effectively, you can have a fully locked diff or a fully open diff. What this means is it gives you a lot of adjustability to the different conditions and to the different driving styles. A fully locked diff will give you lots of traction, lots of grip, but when it comes to turning the wheels, you have no turn-in, you have no slip angle on the outer wheel versus the inner wheel to actually allow you to go around the corner. On contrast, a fully open diff will be very easily to turn because the wheels can unlock from each other to allow the different rotating speed of the wheels as you corner. But of course, when you come back on the power, the wheels are going to spin more easy rather than getting traction in whatever surface that you're in. A rule of thumb is, the lower the grip, the more lock-in you need. The higher the grip, the less unlocked you can be. But this also depends on what balance of the car that you need from a driver's perspective, and also what diff balance you want between the front of the car and the rear of the car. So, how does a limited slip work? Well, we have this diff cluster which is situated inside the differential, which is bolted to the crown wheel and pinion. The crown wheel and pinion is directly driven through the gearbox, or in the rear diff case, through the prop shaft, in through the differential, and ultimately through the diff cluster. And then from the diff cluster, we of course have the drive shafts that come in through each side, and then once this is all loaded up and driven, it distributes the power through each drive shaft. So the heart of a limited slip differential is of course the diff cluster. Inside we have situated the pinion gears, which are being driven on a spider, which then come through to the ramp and the ramp pinion, cross pin, and of course friction plates on the outside. And through this, power gets distributed out to each drive shaft out to the wheel. But within this, we have many things that we can change to set the car up accordingly to the conditions or the driver. The first place we start is the ramps. The diff ramps have a predetermined angle that have been machined into each of the drive angles, which allows you to choose different ramps, again depending on the driver and the conditions. So a more aggressive ramp where it can ramp up quickly and put more load on the differential means more lock-in, a more locked diff. Conversely, a more shallow ramp angle allows the diff to be more free, more open, and it also ramps up a little bit slower. Each diff ramp is matched with a cross pin set, which also has predetermined angles that match the angles within the ramp. So how the different ramp angles work depends on the settings that are available to you. In this case, we have a 30-45. 30 degree here on the acceleration side is a more shallow ramp. What this means is that the cross pin can ramp further up the ramp, pushing the ramp out onto the friction plates to create more lock-in out to the wheel. But on the opposite side, you can see here on the braking side, the 45 is a steeper angle, therefore the pin can't actually push the ramp out as far, therefore less lock-in. The shallower this ramp on the acceleration side, the more aggressive and the more load it's going to put on the friction plates and ultimately out to the wheels. And on the braking side, the higher the angle, or in this case the more straight up and down, 90 degrees, being fully open, means the cross pin can't ramp up anywhere, it's a solid wall, so therefore it's more open. Once the ramp set is inside the differential, the next thing is the stagger of the diff plates on each side of the ramps. And basically what these is a combination of steel plates and friction plates. And the way that how you order these plates on each side of the differential will help determine how locked that your differential is. So an example of that is the more paired friction plates you have with steel, as you alternate them, the more locked the diff will be. But if you want to unlock the diff, we can actually pair friction plates together with a steel on each side of them to half the amount of friction and half the amount of locking. So what you can have with your diff plate stagger is you can have 4+4, 6+6 or 8+8 on both sides of the differential. So this allows you to have different tunability on how much diff locking that you have, also front and rear. And then lastly, the final piece of the puzzle is of course the preload. And the preload is set up once this is all assembled with shims on how much preload it takes to break away the differential. And effectively what this preload is doing is not only making the diff more aggressive or more progressive, it's really changing how quickly the differential ramps up. The more preload you have on the end plates, the harder it is for the ramp to ramp up, so therefore slowing down the ramp up process onto the differential. So you still have the same amount of locking, but you're delaying when that power actually transfers from the differential out to the wheel, or making it more smoother. Conversely, if you have next to no preload, the ramp can ramp up very fast and it can give you instant power at the wheels, but this can unsettle the car and the chassis depending on the driving style and the conditions. So now, once it's all together, we've got a cutaway example here where we can clearly see how all that is working in combination with each other. So you can see here, as we come on power, the cross pin of the diff ramp is climbing up the ramp angle. As it climbs up the ramp angle, it puts pressure on the friction plates on both sides, and then once those have locked in and got traction on each other, it then drives the drive shafts that are coming out both sides of the differential. The same effect on the braking side. You can see as we go into the braking ramp, it's a more steeper ramp angle here, so therefore it's putting less load onto the friction plates, which means the differential is more unlocked, which in most cases you'll often set up your car with a much more open braking ramp to allow you to have turn-in as you're braking and slowing down for the corners. So in terms of the settings that you can use, there is no right and wrong. It very much depends on the driver and the conditions. But speaking from my experience, I've often always had the front differential to be more aggressive, to give me that front wheel drive car pull from the corners. Essentially on gravel, the more sideways that we are on the exit, the slower we're going. So to help us get the car pulling straight on the exit, we need the front differential to be pulling the car forward, which means we need to be locking up the front diff more for more traction. The downside to this is it means that the car is a little bit harder to turn, which depends on the setup of your chassis, whether you use the handbrake, how you rotate the car. There are so many variables which are very driver dependent. But then of course, to work with that, we then need the rear differential to be somewhat a little bit more lazy to allow it to not drive too much on the rear. But there is a fine line. Go too lazy on the rear diff, you lose traction, and you're also going to be going sideways. So if you are sliding, it's not just because you might be driving too much on the rear diff, it could also be because you're driving too little on the rear diff and you're missing traction. So it's all about the balance. So that's the throttle side of the diff setup, but on the braking side, it's also key to have quite an open diff on the front to allow you to get the car turned in to rotate. On the rear, you don't want it to be too open, because if you find under braking, the rear of the car is moving around and is unstable, maybe your rear diff is too unlocked. By locking up your braking ramp on the rear, you're actually allowing the wheels to be turning as you're braking, which helps keep grip and traction to keep more stability in the rear of the car. Too much braking ramp in the rear diff can actually allow you to not turn in. So again, it's about a balance of too little or too much rear brake ramp as much as the front. So summarising, there's obviously a few things that you can change within the differential, but for me, it's important to prioritise on what's going to play the biggest part in setting up your car. And that starts with the differential ramp number 1, the friction plates and the stagger of the plates number 2, and the diff preload number 3. So that was our guide to how the differentials work on a Hyundai i20N Rally2 car. For more videos, make sure you check out our other Rally 101s. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe.